Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the One and O podcast. I'm Joel Haas.
I'm Avery Hill.
And I'm Lyle Alenstein.
We're bringing you this week's episode a little bit early, just because there's so much news that's happened recently. We wanted to get this one out a little bit quicker. A lot of news on the recruiting trail for Penn State. They brought in 6 commitments in the last 8 days, so pretty impressive run. And it started right after we finished filming last week's pod with the commitment of safety Antonio Branch. Lyle, I know you got to kind of look into his film, dig into it a little bit. What did you see from Branch?
Okay, so one thing that stood out to me from Branch is that he's a really good tackler. Run game, obviously, he can bounce around the edges really well, especially can fly down from the secondary, as well as you could stack him in the box when you need like extra guys up front. And I think he does a really good job at reading whether the run's going to the inside or the outside. But another thing that stood out to me with his tackling in the run game is his ability to read the quarterback. I thought on like options and draws that when the quarterback just had to take it himself, he never really took his eyes off him. So that was something that stood out to me. And then obviously tackling the receivers, he doesn't let people beat him in space. He's really good at wrapping them up. But my biggest question mark with him is not a lot of film on him in coverage. So that was just kind of a question mark for me for something that you're getting from a safety. Kind of reminded me of a lot of like Jamal Adams, because I haven't seen that man perform well in coverage in a lot of years. Obviously, I think Poindexter knows what he's doing when he's recruiting guys. And so that was just something I think we should keep an eye on for like his upcoming season and when he gets to college.
Definitely. And then 2 days later, we kind of saw the opposite effect where Penn State actually lost the commitment from the 2025 class when Alvin Henderson flipped to Auburn. And I know you predicted that a few episodes ago, so I want to give you a chance to kind of share your thoughts on Henderson's flip and what that kind of means for Penn State.
Yeah. So May 31, the one in a pod, I made bold. It wasn't really a bold statement, but I said Henderson wasn't going to be gone. And to be honest with you guys, I said he was going to, this isn't in writing or video anyway, but I said he was gone right after he committed. I mean, you didn't really need crystal ball, recruiter prediction machine, future cast. You didn't need any of that. The writing was on the wall for this guy. I got a lot of issues with this commitment because I think he made it so obvious in that video that he was coming to Penn State, and being 2 hours from Auburn, he was just using this as leverage the whole time to get his bag up with the NIL. And I think he basically just used Penn State as an Airbnb, quite frankly, for all his visits, just to leverage that relationship with the Auburn coaching staff, Hugh Freeze. And I don't really think it's a bad loss in the immediate for Penn State. Obviously, the running back room is stacked at the moment with Singleton, Katron. You've got Cam Wallace and Quinn Martin. And then that class right now, you've got Keandre Barker, you've got Tyke Hayes, and pickup, who they just got, Jabri Wallace-Coleman, who we'll touch on in a moment. And then Mickens in the class of 2026. So I don't think that's really a huge loss. One thing I want to look at from this, though, is, quite frankly, it's just the NIL. Like, Penn State doesn't have the money to bring him in. And I don't think it's a player of his caliber. Obviously, his league he plays in, those stats might be a bit inflated. But regardless, he's a good player, but I don't think this is like a huge loss at the moment. But I think down the line, if Penn State can't keep these players in with the NIL, then it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I also think he kind of fits like more for Auburn. I guess there's scheme just playing in the South. I think that's more for him. Obviously, he's from Alabama, but it's kind of funny to me looking now because I don't know if y'all have seen his Twitter, but now he's just recruiting his buddies or whatever. Like he's like, oh yeah, come here. Like I think he screenshotted one of their things or whatever, saying like asking basically if Auburn's the move or whatever. Like it's hilarious how he turned the tide in like a day. Like
yeah, and
he was Auburn all the way. That's crazy.
That's the other thing. He's like, I think after his most recent official visit at Penn State, he was saying he's locked in, fully committed. He was tweeting out videos with Beckham Kritza. And then, his interview after he committed to Auburn, he's like, I know I said I was locked in with Penn State, but now I'm like actually locked in with Auburn. And like, he was going crazy on socials. Like on Penn State Barstool Instagram, like when they like posted about it, bro was in the comment section with the War Eagle emoji bro was doing too much. I'm going to be keeping tabs on what this guy does in the future because this is going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
No, yeah. I mean, that's another thing that he should be taking into consideration because when you're pulling these kind of stunts, I mean, there's obviously some character issues or concerns that can be brought up, especially when you're trying to look at, the next level, things like that. Teams are going to be looking at things like that. But it is always really difficult to try and go into a state like Alabama and pull someone out of that state because a lot of those kids like to stay home. I think it's more of a regional thing down there where Georgia kids, same thing with Louisiana kids. Those kids are always going to kind of in-state programs. So anytime you can go down there, pull someone out, it's always really impressive. Penn State got King Mack out of Alabama a couple of cycles ago, and now he's back down with Alabama. So it's always difficult. And even once you have one of those guys from down south locked up, committed, you never know when they're going to flip, head back down south. It's really difficult to pull players out of that region. And like you guys said, the signs were kind of there. People kind of knew from the beginning. A lot of people are kind of speculating that it was NIL based. Again, we don't have anything to go on there with those reports, but at the moment, it does seem like, he was potentially using Penn State to kind of leverage some more NIL out of Auburn. So it'll be interesting to see where that kind of process ends up. I'm not sure if he's at his final destination or if he's got a few more flips left in him. But Penn State doesn't take too long to bounce back. One day later, the Nittany Lions add a 4-star running back. Jabri Wallace-Coleman gets added to the 2025 class, kind of filling in Henderson's spot there. So it didn't take Penn State long to bounce back and get back up to 3 running backs in the class. Avery, I know you did the film review for him. What did you see from him?
I mean, first thing I saw was just his frame. It kind of not threw me off, but he didn't really look like a running back to me. He kind of looks more like a receiver. I think he's listed to like 6 foot, maybe 205, something like that, which seems about right, but he's lengthy. Like, that'll be like my biggest question for him as a running back, maybe like pad level, things like that. But I will say, like, his footwork is really what stands out. Like, he's really shifty. He can move, and he also knows how to move his feet. I mean, I think he's going to be versatile. I saw him catch some passes out of the backfield, take him about 60 yards. I mean, I think he'll be a guy that you're going to really try to spread out wide. Like, even in my article, I kind of talked about just how Nicky did with Devin Neal at Kansas. Devin Neal is really going to run end to end. He's not a north-south back, and I think that's what Jabri Wallace-Coleman will end up being. I mean, he had, 3,000 yards in 3 seasons, obviously out of Philadelphia, 31 touchdowns last season. So, 31 touchdowns last season, which sounds inflated, but hey, we'll talk about that. But I do think that there's a bright future with him, and also with the fact that he was a Georgia decommit. I mean, at Georgia, they had Fran Brown before he went to Syracuse, which he is the best recruiter in the world. That's not really a debate. And I think Fran Brown knows what he's looking for as well with recruiting, as you can tell Georgia's history and, the past 5 years, 10 years. So I think that there's a lot to look forward to, and I think that he didn't commit to Georgia for no reason. And I think him coming to Penn State is a big plus and will definitely replace the loss of Alvin Henderson.
I'm going to make a statement now. We'll see how this plays out in a few years. But if these 3 backs in that class stick around, because obviously the way they're recruiting and what we've seen this week, it's not really official till you put pen to paper. But I think he's the best back in the class. I really liked what I saw from him on tape. And I'm not just comparing him to Alvin Henderson. I'm comparing him to Barker and Tyke Hayes. I really like what he brings to the table. He gives off a lot of versatility, and I think you could use that with Jalen Sider. But another thing I think that's big with him coming on board is he's an in-state guy who plays at Imhotep Charter. And we've seen that Penn State likes to recruit from there. Right now they've got Keon Wiley on board. You've got Tyseer Denmark, Kenny Woosley, and just a bunch of guys that I think that's a lot of talent that comes from that school. And from them to get a standout running back can have implications in the long run when it comes to recruiting.
The next day, Sunday, was arguably Penn State's busiest day. And it began with a commitment from 3-star safety Braswell Thomas. Lyle was able to take a look at his film. So Lyle, what did you see from Thomas?
Yeah, I wasn't all too familiar with his game, but I'm glad I got familiar. I think this guy was a diamond in the rough. I think he can surge up on the recruiting boards by the time with a good senior season. He's 6'2", I think 170, and you could see his height on the field really play an impact. He's a really, really freakish athlete. He's got a really nice vertical. He played both sides of the ball, both safety and wide receiver, and you could see that when he was like jumping over the top to catch passes like on like fade routes and stuff and deep balls. And then on the defensive end, he was jumping over wide receivers over the middle, down the sideline. It didn't matter. I just think he's a really good athlete. You just make him see lots of plays on the ball, whether it's just breaking up passes, forcing fumbles, just changing the trajectory of opposing offenses. And then obviously something that's been a theme of the guys that Poindexter and Terry Smith have brought in. He's a hard hitter. You see him, he comes in and hits guys with a lot of force. I saw a bunch of forced fumbles and stuff, just guys laying on their back, not knowing what to do after he was done with them. And I think this is a good pickup. I'm excited to see what he can do in the future.
Yeah. So Thomas's commitment momentarily pushed Penn State into the top 10 of the overall team rankings for 2025. And then shortly after, DJ McClary flipped his commitment to Rutgers, which bumped Penn State back down below Rutgers to number 11. But we've kind of talked about on a previous episode Rutgers' recent ascension, some recent, heating up on the recruiting trail. Rutgers, again, putting together a really good class. They're borderline top 10 right now. A little bit of a bigger class. I think they're up to like 25 commitments right now, and Penn State's around 17, 18. But at the same time, you can't discount a borderline top 10 class, especially when it's coming from a school like Rutgers, who traditionally isn't even in that top 25 range. And again, we got to talk about this a little bit earlier on a previous episode. But yeah, I mean, I think Rutgers is really doing some big things on the recruiting trail. Avery, did you want to add your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think it is a testament to what Rutgers is doing. I mean, I think, of course, if you're Penn State, you're like, okay, we can be just doing something better. Of course, you don't want Rutgers to be beating you, given, again, they were treated like a joke beforehand. I think in Penn State's eyes, it's like, oh, wow, like we're getting beat by Rutgers. But on Rutgers, and I think it's just a testament to the job that Schiano is doing. I mean, he's changing that program, not just in recruiting, but I feel like he's doing it on the field. I mean, you looked at them last year; they made a vast improvement from years prior. I mean, they had a good year, and I think even just their losses, they weren't bad losses. I think you expect a lot out of Rutgers going into this season, and if you're adding the recruiting to that standpoint, I think it's a lot for Rutgers. So I think that's really just kudos to Rutgers. I mean, they're really nailing guys from the area, which isn't easy. I might add, as I talked about earlier with Fran Brown, he's at Syracuse. He's a Jersey guy, so he could easily be scooping up all these guys as well, but he's not. Again, Penn State is always getting these Jersey guys as well, so it's an uphill battle, or it was an uphill battle for Rutgers, but now they've kind of turned the table, and again, they're showing what they can do, and honestly just flexing in front of Penn State's face at this point.
Yeah, we saw that they were bringing out some cars onto the field for recruits. That seems to be becoming a trend now. I don't know if Penn State's got the power to do that, be bringing out those cars during those recruiting visits like that.
I mean, I would say they have the power, but I think Penn State might be the only school in the country that doesn't bring cars to the visit. I feel like even Texas State has some sort of car. It might be a little Honda Accord, but I think just about every school in the country has. I know Maryland's had it for years. I've seen it a while ago. I mean, it depends on the school, and I mean, you see what you get. I mean, you look at different schools and why they're good, why they're not good. Some schools that over recruit and do nothing. Texas A&M. I mean, what, huh? This is just different schools. It depends on the school.
Maybe Penn State's just choosing not to. I feel like it's not really their style. Moving on from that wasn't the end of the day for Penn State, because later that night, the Nittany Lions pick up another commitment from four-star edge Cortez Harris, who then bumped the class back into the top 10. And if you were following me on Twitter, you would have seen a little hint to that the morning of, where he responded to a tweet where a Penn State fan was commenting about the lack of defensive linemen in the class and said that they were worried. And then Cortez Harris replied to the tweet and said, "Don't be," with an emoji. So he kind of hinted at his own commitment the morning of. So we kind of saw that one coming at least a little bit in advance, but he eventually ends up committing Penn State's second commitment of the day. Again, bumping them back into the top 10. So they add Cortez Harris back in. And Avery, I know you got a chance to look at him a little bit. What did you see from his film?
Yeah, I mean, what immediately stood out for me is him as a pass rusher. I mean, he has the ability to get to the passer. I mean, I think a lot of the times that I see, he's not just, okay, you can get to the quarterback in 3 seconds, which of course is important, but you also need those relentless pass rushers, those pass rushers that the quarterback still has the ball 5 seconds in, like he's hitting them, like he's there, he's still working at it, which would be, important when quarterbacks are trying to extend plays and, you're playing against mobile quarterbacks. I think that's what stood out for me. And then also just, again, the competition that he played, because, I mean, as we talked with Alvin Henderson, he didn't really play much competition. He played 1A ball, and it's sometimes hard for guys like that to translate. But, I mean, Cortez Harris has played high-level ball his whole career. I mean, he started at DeMatha, which, of course, is arguably, easily a top 20 team in the country, usually every year. I don't know where they stood last year, but generally top 20. Then he did transfer to St. Francis Academy, which is usually like number 3-ish in the country. He didn't stay the whole time. Like, he didn't even make it into the season. He transferred by the time he got to like August. But hey, I mean, he practiced with high level talent. But then even at Riverdale Baptist, I mean, you get a lot of different talented guys coming out of there, and guys, competition that play on the offensive line. So I think there's a lot to look forward to him. I think that he might be a good ad, but I don't know. I haven't seen enough to tell me, okay, he's like this A+ guy. He's just maybe the Chop Robinson of the world, even the maybe what Abdul Carter can be, or guys in the past. I mean, Shaka Tony, guys like that. I don't think he's one of those guys, but I do think that if he keeps working, he can get to that level. It's just he's kind of raw right now.
I think we'll see. I agree with the raw take. I think we'll see what he does when he comes to campus. But another thing to take away from his recruitment was when he was on his official, he was with Ohio State commit Zahir Mathis, who is at the time he committed to Ohio State was the #1 player in Pennsylvania. Now he's #2 behind Missouri quarterback Matt Zollers, who Penn State fans, if you know, big target that they missed out on. But I think that's something to take away. Obviously, we'll see what happens. Obviously, that's another guy from Imhotep Charter, and now you see the guys that are coming in. Obviously, his teammates, which are Bree Wallace-Coleman. So something to keep an eye on there. I don't really know the odds of flipping that commitment, but he's there on campus. There might be some stuff going on behind the scenes nobody knows about. So he could the leverage with NIL. I don't know if we got the money for that, but we'll see if that happens. Obviously, we're not going to know any numbers for that. But yeah, I think Harris was the first defensive end guy to get on board, the first defensive lineman in the 2025 class. And then they just picked up a second guy, Max Granville, right before this, minutes before we started recording. So
and the first thing that stood out, I mean, he is violent. Like I saw him literally like just chuck a running back in the air. Like I'm not exaggerating. You can go look at the film. Like he was just throwing guys around. But then I went to look. He went to Fort Bend Christian Academy in Texas. They're ranked about 453 in the state of Texas. Went about 6-6. Crazy numbers, right. And then you go to look at his stats. I mean, he had 20 sacks in 2022. He had 12 sacks in 2023. He also had 7 pass breakups in each season. So there, I'm kind of questioning first the validity of the stats and also just his competition level. Again, if you're ranked about 450 something in the country and you're 6-6, that means you're not a good team. I mean, you can go 6-6 and be a top 20 team because you're playing really good competitive teams, but 453, I know Texas is big, but Texas isn't that big. I mean, I don't know how Texas divisions work, but I know it's a Division II Texas school. I don't know what difference that makes. It might be a money thing, but I will say, I mean, he still made plays. I mean, not everyone had 20 sacks. I don't think. I might be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Granville, but I don't think everyone had 20 sacks. I mean, he's almost 6'3", about 220 pounds. He's still a decent sized guy, and he could put on weight. I mean, he's in Texas. It shouldn't be a problem for him. Just go to the store, start eating. It's not hard. So I do think there is still a lot of promise with him. I think he ends up as an edge rusher with his given stats and everything. But I think that, again, he might be another guy that's raw and a guy that you need to work with because he has to get used to playing just top guys in the country, guys that are going to punch you in the mouth every single play. But nonetheless, it is a good ad for Penn State and a good spot for Granville.
Texas is big, but Texas isn't that big. Make it a quote.
Write that down.
So as of right now, at 7:58 on Monday, I don't know if you can see that. We're all caught up on commitments. Maybe by the next time we talk to you guys, there'll be a few more recruits on board for Penn State's 2025 and maybe even 2026 class. So a few guys that Penn State's kind of keying in on right now, specifically at wide receiver. That's kind of a position that's been lacking in this group. They're kind of looking to add some more talent. And also just a position that the last few years, we haven't really seen those high-end recruits come in. So it's really been a position of emphasis. Marquez Hagan's now in his second offseason with the program. And obviously we saw what happened with the wide receiver room last year. We've heard the talk heading into this year. So he's definitely motivated to try and pick it up on the recruiting trail. There's a few receivers that Penn State's been kind of looking into, specifically to throw out some names like Cyrus, Jeff Exenor, Taz Williams, also 4-star wide receivers that Penn State's been showing some interest in. I do want to note that Williams went out to Michigan recently. It seemed like he kind of enjoyed that visit and might be leaning a bit more toward the Wolverines now than he was previously, but that's a guy that Penn State's been recruiting really hard. If you're active on Twitter, you've seen several Penn State commitments who have been tweeting #WeWantTaz, who have been retweeting his posts, things like that, trying to convince him to come to Penn State. But at the end of the day, I think there are a lot more important factors than, how many retweets you get on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the receiver, recruiting department, I think that they don't have to look at just strictly receivers or guys that are high school receivers, even the guys that most people are committing or recruiting to be receivers. I mean, being in Kotelnicki's offense, I mean, he does like having playmakers. So, I mean, you can get guys from the running back position, guys that play cornerback, guys that play safety, guys, maybe even a guy that played linebacker. He's just a big linebacker that can also play receiver. I think those are guys you can look at to flip into receivers because I think they're really having a problem bringing guys in to be receivers. I mean, obviously, you're not going to just tell them, yeah, there's no chance of playing receiver and just throw them there. But I do think that there's guys that they can convince, okay, you might be better at receiver. You can do it like that. Like, again, going back to Kotelnicki's offense, I mean, he runs the motion a lot. I mean, getting guys in motion and getting guys the ball will be what he needs to do regardless of what position. I mean, even Wallace Coleman, as I said, he has a receiver-like body. Maybe he even transitions into a receiver. I mean, he looked like more of a scat back to me than anything anyway. I mean, if you want to run screens, if you want to, get quick outs, things like that, I think he could be the guy for that job. Of course, not the only guy, but I think at the end of the day, Penn State's recruiting targets don't have to be just, guys that have been strictly receivers. It can be tight ends, just any guy that you can teach to catch the football, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with that take because you see it. They're willing to make position changes all the time, even before their recruitment. Obviously, you're seeing 2025 commit Matt Henderson. He plays primarily wide receiver in high school, but when he comes to campus, he's going to be playing tight end. And you see tight end commit Brady O'Hara. He's probably playing O-line. So, you see these kind of changes all the time by the time they get to campus. But I think if we're looking at the wide receiver targets that are on board right now, I think Lex Cyrus, I think he will be becoming Nittany Lion. I think Jeff Exonar, I think he's got a pretty good shot. Obviously, I think he's making his commitment on Friday. So I know he's Maryland, Virginia Tech. They're both involved. So those could go either way, I think. Taz, I don't really know the odds there. I know he's got Pittsburgh roots and stuff because he grew up in Pennsylvania. So that's always a factor. I know he's got family here. Something to look at. But obviously Michigan and then Texas A&M, SMU close to home. So that could play a factor. But another guy, I think, flying under the radar a little bit, Matthew Outen, another Virginia guy. I think he's kind of not looked at as highly because of his rating. He's a 3-star, but I looked at some film on him a little while ago, and I really like his potential. I think he's super fast guy. He's got a track background. He's got a really good frame too. I think he's 6'2", and with that speed, I think he's just a matchup nightmare. And I think you build a scheme around him, or you get some good development going with him. And I think that's a good choice. I know he's also Virginia Tech, Syracuse, other schools in the mix there, but I think if Penn State can land him, I think that'd be a good Big Ten pickup.
Yeah, and I think just to add off of that, I do think that Penn State just going in the recruiting direction, I don't think this is the year that they're okay, well, the 2025 class is where they solve all of its receiver problems, at least not in this cycle right now. Maybe get some late commitments or something like that, maybe after the season of guys that want to play for Penn State. But I think they'll have to prove that their receivers will actually become playmakers. I think part of the problem of not getting receivers and not retaining receivers is just they don't feel like they're going to get the ball. Obviously, it's a new offense. Yurcich is gone. I mean, you've gone through changes all around. I think that'll change. But, again, you have to actually show that on the field for guys to want to come, especially receivers, because receivers are usually known as, the biggest, divas on the team, for lack of a better terms. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, you look at the guys that left. I mean, Keandre Leonard-Smith, I mean, obviously it seemed that he wanted that number one role. I don't know for sure, but it seemed like he thought he deserved more involvement. And, I mean, you kind of look at, West Virginia, I know he had, the 72-yard catch, but he only had 3 more catches after that. Of course, he had another touchdown. But it is worth noting, there's some guys that are going to want 8, 9, 10 targets. So when you start bringing playmakers in there and start showing that you can get guys the ball, I think that's when players will start to come, because obviously the NIL thing is not something that'll be easy for them to fix. So why not fix it on the field?
Yeah. I do want to pivot over to the quarterbacks a little bit, just touch on kind of Penn State's quarterback situation when it comes to recruiting to wrap up this episode. So Penn State's 2025 class currently sits with only 1 quarterback commitment, which, is pretty typical for a class with 3-star Beckham Kritza, but they were in on Matt Zollers, who we mentioned a little bit earlier as the top recruit in Pennsylvania. Missed out on Zollers. He went to Missouri. And then it looked like they were kind of pursuing 4-star Malik Washington for a little bit to kind of add a second quarterback into that class. Now it looks like he's projected to go to Maryland, and his commitment date is set for Friday. So depending on when you're watching this episode, he might already be committed But yeah, it looks like he's definitely a Maryland lean. Penn State kind of took their foot off the gas there. It looks like they're just going to round out the 2025 class with one quarterback. But then looking at next year's class, they actually have received some buzz recently. They're kind of in the mix for four-star quarterback Troy Hune, who's actually the number 10 quarterback in the 2026 class. So it'd be a pretty big pickup for Penn State, one of the better quarterbacks to commit to Penn State if it happens. But we've seen some predictions out there where he's kind of been leaning toward committing to Penn State, which would be a big pickup for the Nittany Lions. We're not sure exactly the timeline on that. He's been pretty quiet as far as the commitment date and things like that. But that's kind of how the quarterback situation is looking right now for Penn State. That's it for today's episode of the 1-0 podcast. Thank you guys for watching. For more football coverage, you can find us at psucollegian.com and follow us on socials. We'll see you next time.